I have really enjoyed the preparation for this lesson. Last night, very unusual in my life, I found myself all alone with a lovely fire and no distractions and several hours to myself that I could go back and just read these chapters and think deeply about them, and it was just a marvelous time. Hugh Nibley says that in particular, Mosiah 26 and 27 are some of the most important chapters in all of Holy Writ, and I think we'll see why as we do a close reading of them today. But as I begin, I've also done a little bit of thinking about this class, and as I look back over it, of course, it's such a privilege to even be a part of it, but as I look back over the sessions that we've had, the ones that stand out in my mind are those where members of the class have been inspired to share something fairly personal that has been life-changing for them in regard to the topic that we are dealing with. That's always harder than just getting up and saying what we are expected to say about any given subject. And this lesson in particular, as we go into it, I would like you to be thinking prayerfully in your heart if there's something you would like to share that has been life-changing for you on the subject of influence. In our last episode, the wicked King Noah and his lousy priests put Abinadi to death. We didn't study that very deeply. We didn't go through the chapters too deeply where Abinadi, we did have the rabbi talk to us about the 10 Commandments, but Abinadi then goes on to preach a stirring sermon about the mission of Jesus Christ. King Noah is frightened of him and would probably have spared him. It's a little bit of a foreshadowing of the kinds of things that go on at the trial of Jesus. In fact, you can find many similarities there. However, his little entourage, who sees their livelihood slipping away if the king should in fact repent, that good 20% tax they were charging everybody so that they could live in luxury might slip away as well. They prey on his fear and say this man is going to try to overthrow the kingdom. So anyway, they put him to death. After he dies, they go after Alma. He escapes into the wilderness with a little band of followers, and we studied the baptismal covenant, which was taught in chapter 18. So we're all together on that, right? They're in the wilderness, and they go a little ways away, and they begin to sort of trip over some other groups. This is where I always get confused in the Book of Mormon. And it doesn't matter how many times I go back and read it, I'm still confused. But Alma, they meet. Okay, I wrote down who they meet. They meet Amulon, who is the head of the priests. Remember how the priests of Noah all fled? And they were out in the wilderness, and they got lonely, and they started kidnapping Lamanite girls? And so they meet that guy, the head of the priests of Noah, who, they're all really wicked priests, and they have kidnapped a bunch of Lamanite girls, and because they have got these Lamanite girls and have married them now, they have formed an alliance with the Lamanites. The king of the Lamanites is named, thankfully, Laman, so we can remember that. And so we have three kind of factions. We have Alma and the faithful followers who left the people of King Noah. We have the priests of King Noah, because King Noah's dead now. They have the priests of King Noah who had escaped and had kidnapped these Lamanite girls, and they've formed a little colony, and they have contracted with the Lamanites. And of course, Amulon is one of these wicked guys who then gets in, and he puts one of his priests over each one of the major areas in the Lamanite kingdom. And so the Lamanites are actually being taught in the language of the Nephites, but they're being taught all the wrong stuff. They're not being taught the gospel. They're being taught whatever Amulon is selling. So we have all of that going on. And in this environment, we have Alma trying to build a colony of Christians and trying to build the faith. Now, after a period of time, they go a little further and they get to Zarahemla and they meet King Mosiah. And this is because they are persecuted, of course, by Amulon and everybody else. So they keep sort of going further into the wilderness, and they meet yet another group. They meet King Mosiah. And at this point, we have two of the great figures of the Book of Mormon who meet each other, King Mosiah and Alma. And they love each other, obviously. And they start to go through and they look through all the records and they get everything out and they read everything and it is there that we are given an explanation of a person who has the gift of translation being a seer. So that foreshadows Joseph Smith. So we have all of that in there, and I went over it that fast. So we're going to get into the chapters of Mosiah, the later chapters of Mosiah. In chapter 24, we have Amulon, who is persecuting Alma and his group, right? They're going to put them to death if they catch them praying. I think this is kind of comical, but once again, it's another biblical thing. It was Daniel, right? If you were seen praying in public, that you could be put to death. That's how he ended up in the lion's den. But the Lord makes their burdens light. He delivers them from bondage. They get to Zarahemla, and into chapter 25 we go. There are more descendants of somebody named Mulek in the land of Zarahemla. Now this gets me confused again. Some of you who know more about the Book of Mormon than I do could explain this to me, but there's another group there. And so there are all these people, but they begin to divide them again simply by what they believe. The people who believe in God and believe in the church always end up sort of getting lumped into the saying that they are Nephites, and then the Lamanites. So we have two distinctions. We have actually what people they come from, and then we have what they actually believe. I'm going to just take a moment in 25 and 5. Is everybody with me? It came to pass that Mosiah did read and caused to be read the records of Zeniff to his people, from the time they left the land of Zarahemla till they return again. Then he read the account of Alma and his brethren, and the time they left the land of Zarahemla and they returned again. So there's people leaving this land and coming back. And now when Mosiah had made an end of reading all the records, the people who tarried in the land were struck with wonder and amazement. And the reason I just wanted to read this out loud is because I think that whenever we really feel the Spirit, this is kind of how we respond to the Scriptures. For they knew not what to think. For when they beheld those that had been delivered out of bondage, they were filled with exceedingly great joy. Have you ever had the experience where you're reading the Scriptures and you just kind of feel like you're right there with them? And again, when they thought of their brethren who had been slain by the Lamanites, they were filled with sorrow and even shed many tears of sorrow. And again, when they thought of the immediate goodness of God and his power in delivering Alma and his brethren out of the hands of the Lamanites and of bondage, they did raise their voices and give thanks to God. And it goes on like that. As they read, they're just living these scenes. And that would be kind of a fun family night thing to talk about. When have we ever had that experience? A great little story by Marion G. Romney, who was a member of the First Presidency, who said that he used to go into his son's room at night and lie on the lower bunk, where his son was on the higher bunk, and they would read the Book of Mormon together, and they would take turns just reading. And one night when his son was reading, he stopped for a little while, and then he started again. And after a while, like a boy would do, he kind of quietly said, "Dad, do you ever cry when you read the Book of Mormon?" And Marion G. Romney said, "Yes, son, I do. Sometimes I cry when I read the Book of Mormon." And his son said, "Oh, okay. I did too." And Marion G. Romney shared that story to let us know that if we don't have this kind of an experience, sometimes we're missing it, aren't we? We're missing what's going on. Okay, so now we get to Mosiah 26, and these two very important chapters. The first chapter, and once again, they don't seem to be, they seem to be about two different things, but to me, one gets us ready for the great experience of Mosiah 27. So there's a lot of people in the church who have wandered off. Maybe there's splinter groups. They don't believe. There's different things going on, right? And it seems to always be that one of the first beliefs we kick out the window is the belief in the resurrection. So if we can get rid of that, then we can start to take the Savior down and make him less than he is. If we truly believe in the resurrection, the whole plan of salvation is right there, and we are accountable. So I think that you always can find in any generation of time that when people stop believing in the resurrection and, for example, get really interested in zombies and vampires, we are in a state of unbelief. Just to make a personal comment, my book is at the editor's, and I was really worried. One of my last chapters is the glorious resurrection versus the zombie apocalypse. And I was really worried that they would cut that and not keep it, because I really feel like all this Walking Dead zombie vampire Twilight business is indicative of a world that is trying to get rid of the resurrection. Anyway, they left it, so I'm happy. So the zombie apocalypse is coming in March. So anyway, the Walking Dead are coming. We're going to go back to chapter 26. But just to be aware, here's a couple of things in chapter 26 that really touch my heart. Verse 11 touches my heart. There's kind of a tennis match going on where the king is trying to hand these unbelievers to Alma, and Alma's trying to hand them back. Nobody really wants to be the one to prosecute them. And they're not sure what to do about them. We are going to think about ourselves as parents today. What kind of parents are we? We all try to be good parents. If you had to, someone had to describe what kind of parents you are. The scriptures talk to us about what kind of parents we need to be, and it's kind of scary. They say, you know, inasmuch as there are parents in Zion who have children and teach them not to be baptized, and then the sin be upon the head of the parents, and they need to teach them to walk uprightly and pray and be wonderful. And so all of us are automatically racked with guilt if our children do not accomplish all of these things. Most of us get them baptized, but it's that teaching them to walk uprightly for the rest of their lives that is the tricky part. How much do we blame ourselves? What is our responsibility as parents? And what can we do as parents to have a greater impact on our children? And that's what we're going to be thinking about today. And it also works as grandparents, aunts, uncles, and anybody in the village that's connected with raising a child, because as we will learn, Alma employs the village, not just himself as a father. Now, this touches my heart in verse 13 in chapter 26. The spirit of Alma was troubled, and he went and inquired of the Lord what he should do concerning this matter, for he feared he should do wrong in the sight of God. So to me, this is one of the first indications of what Alma is like. Here is a person who is a high priest. He has started the church all by himself. There wasn't anyone to teach him how to start the church. He formed a whole church. He went in the water and sort of baptized himself and then started baptizing people. He knew he had authority. He knew he was a priest, but all of the teachings, all of the training were gone. And so he came up with this all himself, simply on the words of Abinadi. And when the angel speaks to Alma, or when the Lord speaks to Alma in this chapter, he says twice, in verse 15, "Blessed art thou, Alma, and blessed are they who were baptized in the waters of Mormon. Thou art blessed because of thy exceeding faith in the words alone of my servant Abinadi." And later again, he says it again, in the words alone. All you did was hear this talk by Abinadi, and you extrapolated everything from that. You did that. And I'm blessing you because of it. You're blessed because you were morally creative. You were righteously creative. You took the initiative and did this thing. And then comes this moment, which gives us another indication about Alma. This is sacred ground in the scriptures. This is ground that we don't walk on very often. But it's there all the way through the scriptures. And that is in this chapter, Alma's calling and election is made sure. Let's read it. Verse 20, "Thou art my servant, and I covenant with thee that thou shalt have eternal life." That's a different covenant than we normally receive. "And thou shalt serve me and go forth in my name and shall gather together my sheep." In every experience in the scriptures where someone's calling and election is made sure, right in the same breath, the Lord says something like, "And what you bind in earth shall be bound in heaven. What you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Or, "I know that you will never do anything that is contrary to my will." As I understand this principle, there are certain people who, in their test in life, reach the end of that test before they reach the end of their life. In other words, they have proven themselves so completely to be the Lord's that he seals them his, and that part of the test is over. And they just continue to be a tool in his hands because he can 100% trust that everything that they do will be his will. This is attainable. Most of us are not in that league. But it's there in the scriptures. It's there with Joseph Smith in the Doctrine and Covenants. It happens to him. It's there in the Bible. It's there. And when we see it there, we think to ourselves, it's marvelous that the Lord has that kind of love and trust in his people, that he really does believe that we can come to a point where our hearts are one with him. That's probably enough said about that, except that I think it's interesting. I've been trying to think all morning, so just as a trivia quiz, Bruce R. McConkie added a verse to one of the hymns in our hymn book about having your calling and election made sure. It's a familiar hymn, and he added a verse that said that you'll press forward in Christ till thine election sure. And it's in one of the lower verses. I've sung it, but I can't remember the hymn. So just to keep you wondering about it. When I was younger, much younger, because my Aunt Lucy was sealed to the prophet Joseph Smith, I was a philosophy minor, and so my teacher and mentor was Truman Madsen, and he was a grandson of Heber J. Grant, who was also sealed to Joseph Smith. And one time he opened for me at his office. He said, I'll give you an opportunity to look at this. And he had the old Smith family temple record. It was a beautiful old book, where in handwriting were written all of the dates of the endowments and ordinances of all of the members of the Smith family from Joseph Smith on, everyone who was ever sealed to Joseph Smith. And so that I could see my aunt's name in there. And I was at the time intrigued when I saw at the end of the column where it said where she was baptized and endowed, and then at the end it's second anointing, and it had a date there for her. And I thought at the time, as Hamlet said, there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our philosophy. There is in Heavenly Father's plan for us more than we think of ourselves. He thinks of us higher than that. So this is who Alma is. Alma has reached a point in his personal spiritual development where God trusts him that whatever he does will be God's will. He really has become a person who has power in his priesthood in regard to his posterity and those who come after him. He has brought into himself what we hope to bring into ourselves by living our covenants. And so this is who we're talking about. This is a person who has made a great sacrifice in his own life to be a spiritual influence on others. With that as a backdrop, let's read Mosiah 27. And now it came to pass that the persecutions were inflicted upon the church by the unbelievers became so great that the church began to murmur and complain to their leaders concerning the matter. And they did complain to Alma, and Alma laid the case before the king Mosiah, and Mosiah consulted with his priests. And that is the backdrop that we are. And they then talk about how they have church probably courts, or they discipline them in some ways, and they make a what do I say? There's an injunction, I can't think, that people may not be persecuted. So then there's peace. Verse 8. But the sons of Mosiah, now these men are princes, right? They are heirs to the kingdom, so they have great privilege. The sons of Mosiah were numbered among the unbelievers, and also one of the sons of Alma was numbered among them, he being called Alma after his father. Nevertheless, he became a very wicked and an idolatrous man. This is important, I think, because sometimes these are portrayed as teenage boys out goofing around in the parking lot at church. This is not who these people were. These were men with great gifts, and they were using these gifts to destroy the church. And he was a man of many words, and did speak much flattery unto the people. Therefore he led many of the people to do after the manner of his iniquities. And he became a great hindrance to the prosperity of the church of God. It's interesting how much damage one person can do, huh? Stealing away the hearts of the people, causing much dissension among the people, giving a chance for the enemy of God to exercise his power over them. And now it came to pass, and is everybody with me? I'm in chapter 27, verse 10. And now it came to pass that while he was going about to destroy the church of God, who does this remind you of, by the way? Yes, exactly. Almost the same words, huh? Saul, Paul. As he was going about to destroy the church of God, for he did go about secretly with the sons of Mosiah, seeking to destroy the church. My husband Craig says about people who leave the church, it's very interesting about people who leave the church and are continually, making websites and complaining and doing whatever they can to destroy it. He said, isn't it interesting how people leave the church, but they can't leave it alone? They cannot just leave it. They can't. I mean, it's fine with me if you leave the church, just leave. But they don't leave. They stick around and try to destroy it, which is in its way quite a testimony, isn't it? That there's something there. And to lead astray the people of the Lord, contrary to the commandments of God, or even the king. So now they're both, it's both the spiritual thing and the secular law. That's why they're doing it in secret now. And as I said unto you, who's talking? Mormon. This story is told twice in the Book of Mormon. That's an indicator to us that it's really an important story. Anybody know where else it's told? Alma where? Alma 36. And in Alma 36, it will be told in the first person by the guy it happened to, Alma the younger. And it will be told in a letter to his son. It's a different account. It's just what he saw. This is Mormon in a third-person omniscient narrator voice who has all of the records in front of him, distilling it for us in a absolutely marvelous rendition. It's just, the two of them together are amazing. As I said unto you, as they were going about rebelling against God, behold, the angel of the Lord appeared unto them, and he descended as it were in a cloud. And he spake as it were with a voice of thunder, which caused the earth to shake, upon which they stood. When we talked about what kind of parent we are, how we sort of just like to think of ourselves as that parent up on top who is just always, kindly and gently. Unfortunately, it just descends into this other area so often. And that's kind of what we need to talk about. How do we keep from doing that Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing where we turn into one of those people that we used to look at in grocery stores and say, what's wrong with them? And so great was their astonishment that they fell to the earth and understood not the words which he spake unto them. Nevertheless, he cried again, saying, Alma, arise and stand forth. For why persecutest thou the church of God? For the Lord hath said, this is my church, and I will establish it, and nothing shall overthrow it, save it is the transgression of my people. And again the angel said, behold, the Lord hath heard, listen to who the Lord heard, the prayers of his people, and also the prayers of his servant Alma, who is thy father. For he has prayed with much faith concerning thee, that thou mightst be brought to the knowledge of the truth. Therefore, for this purpose I have come to convince thee of the power and authority of God, that the prayers of his servants might be answered according to their faith. And now behold, can you dispute the power of God? For behold, doth not my voice shake the earth? And can you not also behold me before you? And I am sent from God. He keeps repeating this like Alma's an idiot. Now I say unto thee, go, and remember the captivity of thy fathers in the land of Helam and in the land of Nephi, and remember how great things he has done for them. For they were in bondage, and he has delivered them. And now, this is the great part, I say unto thee, Alma, go thy way, and seek to destroy the church no more, that their prayers may be answered, and this even if thou wilt of thyself be cast off. He said, I'm not here because of you at all. And it may be that you may still choose to be cast off. But I'm here, I came all the way from God, I'm shaking the earth. This miracle has happened because of one thing, because of your father and his faith. Now, we know who Alma is because we read chapter 26, and we know what kind of faith he had. And now it came to pass that these were the last words which the angel spake unto Alma, and he departed. And Alma and those that were with him fell again to the earth. For great was their astonishment, for with their own eyes they had beheld an angel of the Lord, and his voice was as thunder, which shook the earth. And they knew there was nothing save the power of God that could shake the earth and cause it to tremble as though it would part asunder. And the astonishment of Alma was so great that he became dumb, that he could not open his mouth, and he became weak, even that he could not move his hands. Therefore he was taken by those that were with him and carried helpless, even until he was laid before his father. And they rehearsed unto his father all that had happened unto them. And his father rejoiced, for he knew it was the power of God. And he caused them, and then this is interesting because even at that point, Alma doesn't assume that God is just going to take care of things. He still feels like he needs to supplicate God. He caused that a multitude should be gathered together, that they might witness what the Lord had done for his son and those that were with him. And he caused that the priests should assemble themselves together, and they began to fast and pray to the Lord their God, that he would open the mouth of Alma, that he might speak, that his limbs might receive their strength, that the eyes of the people might be opened to see and know the goodness of God. And it came to pass that after they had fasted and prayed for the space of 2 days and 2 nights, the limbs of Alma received their strength, and he stood up and began to speak unto them, bidding them to be of good comfort. For he said, I have repented of my sins. I have been redeemed of the Lord, and I'm born of the Spirit. Okay, there that is. We're just going to set that aside for a minute, and we're going to talk about, as parents, what are we doing in the lives of our children and grandchildren? What kind of parents are we? We have something in the Doctrine and Covenants, if you want to open your Doctrine and Covenants to... Would someone stand and read section 121? And section 121 is a great section on the powers of the priesthood. And we know, of course, that the fullness of the priesthood is received in the temple by men and women as they enter in the patriarchal priesthood and become a unit of the church, which is a unit of God's kingdom, where they are going to save their family through the powers of the priesthood. It's only the time they talk to you about the powers of the priesthood. Don't pawn it off on the men. We have this responsibility right along with them. All of the powers of the priesthood are given to us. We may not administer the ordinances, but the powers of the priesthood are given to men and women together as they are sealed together as parents. So as we say, it says in section 121, I think it's really interesting if you look at the page in 121, that right opposite from each other, there's these 2 little scriptural verses, and one's about control and one's about influence. Who will stand up and read verses 36 and 37 to us in section 121? Thank you. Go right ahead.
36 and 37. That the rights of the priesthood are inseparably connected with the powers of heaven, and that the powers of heaven cannot be controlled nor handled only upon the principles of righteousness. That they may be conferred upon us, it is true. But when we undertake to cover our sins, or to gratify our pride, our vain ambition, or to exercise control or dominion or compulsion upon the souls of the children of men, in any degree of unrighteousness, behold, the heavens withdraw themselves. The Spirit of the Lord is grieved, and when it is withdrawn, amen to the priesthood or the authority of that man.
Now, before you sit down, would you tell me what that says to you as a parent?
It says to me that we need to influence with righteousness and try not to be controlling, which is the toughest thing in the world. Because free agency is a right that they have as well as we have, and it's kind of hard sometimes to allow our children to have their free agency.
Now, let me ask all of you to talk to me. Aren't we supposed to control our children? Well, yeah, but I mean, you know, who likes those little 5-year-olds who are running around screaming during sacrament meeting? Well, I mean, somebody give me some guidelines here. When do we control? When do we influence? Stand up, tell me.
We need to control their phones, and usually
would you say that again, please? Because I think we all need to hear that.
we need to control their phones.
Okay.
And if we give them to them, we need to find a way to do that. And right now, we have one phone of one of my children. And this child, I needed this lesson. This child is at home right now because she wouldn't go to school because she doesn't have her phone. So I need your help, Marilyn. Some will not be controlled. She will not be controlled. She's a great girl, but she will not be controlled. She will do whatever she wants. And I don't know what to do, so.
Good. Good. I'm just hoping and praying somebody has the answer today. I hope you don't think it's going to be me. Yes, stand up. Stephanie, talk to me.
Well, I'm not very good at this, but I've just been, as I study the scriptures, looking at Heavenly Father and how he parents us and how he gives us these rules, and he's very good at saying, like, here's the rule, you broke it, here's the consequence. And so when I can stand back and put it back on my kids, like, these were the rules I set down, these are the consequences for them, you made the choice to break this, now I have to follow through. with this consequence, then it kind of takes it off of me, and I could be more patient. This does not happen all the time. Just so
Yeah.
you know.
She's good. These are the ideals.
But I mean, same with
She has 4 boys. We can't expect her to be patient.
So anyway, I've just been trying to be better at that, and it's really difficult, but just, I think that's a good scripture just to help us to remember to be, I don't know, just looking at the way Heavenly Father parents us, and just, you know, he has these rules and these consequences, and we just gotta be consistent at following through and being patient and loving as we do that.
Excellent. That's excellent. Let's talk about 2 things. First of all, let's look at the scriptures as a continuum. The Old Testament is ages 1 through 8 of a child, I would say. And that is, you exercise almost complete control. And that's the way Heavenly Father and Jesus do in the Old Testament. If you commit this sin, you die. I mean, we don't do that with our children, but you know what I mean? Like, we take them and we pull them out of the street where they're walking in front of the car. And we sit them in the foyer and make them sit for 10 minutes so that they learn to sit in church. And we make little rules about when we go to a restaurant, we don't get to scream and yell and run around. At least I hope we make some of those rules. And just all of those kinds of things. If you ever watched The Super Nanny, there's nothing worse than parents who are giving too much choice to children too soon. That's the worst. Now, what's hard about that is that even if we're good at that, pretty good at that, then we get to this thing where they start to get a little older, and you absolutely can't make them do anything. You suddenly realize, I was deceived that I had control over my children. It was only because they were small. Now they're all taller than me, and I absolutely can't make them do anything. Let's think about the word control. That word is con, that's against, and rotula, to roll, is the Latin word like to roll something. And literally, control means to like roll something like a log up a hill. As a visual, let's imagine everything that every little child likes to do is something I like to do still, if it wouldn't hurt my back so much, and that is when you see a nice green grassy hill, what do you want to do? You just want to roll down it. And that's what children do. You know, my 15-year-old son, who went over to the country club one day with his friends and were walking around, suddenly realized that those flags in the golf course could be javelins, you know, and pretty soon they were having this huge javelin fight. And of course, if you're having a javelin fight, you're more like natives, so you've got to take your shirts off. And by the time the authorities found them, that looked like the Lord of the Rings had ensued at the country club. You get these phone calls when you're a parent, and you think, your brain just thinks, how did you even think of getting into that mess? It's like that green hill, you know, they just roll down it. Well, once they're at the bottom of the hill, metaphorically speaking, and they have broken some rule or messed up some way, how do you get them back up to the top of the hill? Try to imagine taking a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old child and rolling them back up a hill. You know, they're not going to cooperate with you, and it's never going to happen. So we have to figure out another way to get them back up the hill. So let's talk about the word influence. Someone stand up and read 121, 41, and 42 for me. Anybody volunteer out there? Got a scripture? Will read to me? Stand right up. Thank you.
No power or influence can or ought to be maintained by virtue of the priesthood, only by persuasion, by long-suffering, by gentleness and meekness, and by love unfeigned, by kindness and pure knowledge, which shall greatly enlarge the soul, without hypocrisy and without God.
We could do a whole nother lesson. Another, I know, is not a word. We could do a whole other lesson on 43, reproving betimes with sharpness when moved upon by the Holy Ghost. Oh my heavens. You know, how many times when you've really let your kids have it were you moved upon by the Holy Ghost? I've been moved upon by a whole lot of things. It's not always the Holy Ghost. And then after showing forth an increase of love toward that child who thou hast reproved, lest that child esteem thee to be his enemy, that he may know that thy faithfulness is stronger than the cords of death. Everything we need to know about parenting is right there. It's just hard to do it. The word influence is related to the word fluid. It is simply an old word that means to something flows in. It's completely different than the word control. The whole feeling of the word, I can only write it in italics. Anytime I make a slide, I have to put it in italics. It's a flowing word. It flows into us. So we're going to think about what's in our toolbox. Here's a little lady with a toolbox, right? I need a scribe. Anybody write well on the board? Stand up, somebody who can write. Come up, come up, come up. Oh, for Pete's sake. Thank you. Okay, under control, let's give a few tools for control. What do we do to control people? What tools would we use? Punishment. Rules. Guilt. Love that one. Threats. Yeah. How should we say that? Restriction. Yeah, we restrict things. I think you need to put money, because many adult parents way on into their lives continue to control their children with money, right? What else? Reward, yes. You can control people with rewards. Control is not always a bad thing. You can use violence, used in many homes, occasionally in mine. Now, love, yes, maybe, yes. I think you can put it there, but love and control, yes, maybe. Yeah, withdrawal of love, definitely. If we use the word control to mean to actually force somebody to do something, whether they want to or not, I think the withdrawal of love is a stronger motivation. Now let's talk about influence. I've put a few things up, but you throw out a few things to me. What things, when you think about somebody who's right now, just get in your head somebody who's had a huge influence on you. What are they like? What tools did they use? Example, huge. What else? Love. Patience. Kindness. Respect. Care. Optimism, kind of a positive faith. Aren't we coming up with an interesting list? What else? Trust. Empathy. Did we put prayer on there? Because I guarantee you that if that person you thought of prays for you. What else? Opportunities. That's cool. I like that. Do we see the feeling? We are challenged as parents and grandparents and people who have influence in life, teachers, to move, thank you, scribe, to move from control to influence. You can control people, and sometimes you have to. I remember one year when, for about 4 years, Craig taught the 13-year-olds, and every class is completely different. You know how that is. You'll get a class one year and you think you're the best teacher in the world, and the next year you're the worst teacher in the world and you don't know what happened. You're still the same person. And I remember one year that we were driving home from church, and he said, I remember last year I was always thinking about, what great lesson I could think of next week for the kids. And he said, this year all I think about is revenge. I just love that. And I knew that group. I still know a lot of those kids. They were a tough group. It's hard. It's hard not to have your own feelings get involved. Yes, Karen.
I just want to say something about control, because I really believe this. I think in most cases, teenagers are begging for some kind of control from a parent.
They're still children.
I remember feeling it myself as I would argue with my dad about wanting to do this certain thing or go to this party.
Right.
And he said absolutely not.
Right.
And secretly I was relieved.
Yeah. Please show me where the wall is. The reason I'm hurling myself against it is to be sure it's there. There was one really great child therapist or whatever that I used to read all the time, whose name I can't remember, but one time somebody wrote him and said, I give my kids a midnight curfew and it doesn't work. And he wrote back and said, what time does your son come home? And he said, it's always around 12:30. And he said, the curfew's working perfectly. He's dancing around that time. If he was coming home at 3 in the morning, the curfew would not be working. But he can't give you the whole win. He's a teenager, right? And so he's going to, but the curfew is working. The rule is working. The child is throwing himself against it and making sure it's there. And so that's the tricky thing with parents. You've got to tread this line where you move from control to influence in a slow way. If you can't get there, you'll have bad relationships with your adult children, because you will still keep trying to control them. You may do it very subtly with criticism, once again with money, with opportunities, with things, but your children will smell it. They'll know it. They'll know that you're trying to manipulate them as opposed to having faith and influencing them. It's much harder to influence because you have to do all this spiritual stuff. Okay.
So what she's basically saying is boundaries, and the Lord gives us boundaries.
Yes.
He gave Alma a boundary. Look, either shape up or out you go.
Yeah. So this is what she's talking about is boundaries, and we have boundaries all of our lives, and with our even with our adult children, the idea of influence doesn't mean, and I've seen parents do this, where it means, okay, our children have made this other choice, we kind of wash our hands of them, we just accept them, and we just, go with whatever they, no, that's not what influence is about. Influence is about something much bigger, where we believe more in the gospel than we do in the adversary. And we believe in the power of Christ to work a miracle. And he begins to use us to work that miracle in very unusual ways. And this is what happened to Alma. And so just thinking about control and influence and what's in my toolbox. As I'm working with a child, as I'm talking with a child, am I using influence as much as I possibly can? Here's a quote that I like. And I'm going to read this from Joseph F. Smith. This was a quote. My first 2 children were boys. I have 4 older brothers and a younger brother. I was raised with a lot of boys in my life, and they're different than girls. Girls are a little meaner and boys are a little tougher, but they both can be hard. But here's a beautiful thing that Joseph F. Smith said. If you wish your children to be taught in the principles of the gospel, if you wish them to love the truth and understand it, if you wish them to be obedient and united with you, love them. And to prove to them that you do love them by your very word or act to them, however wayward they might be, when you speak or talk to them, do it not in anger, do it not harshly in a condemning spirit. Speak to them kindly. Get them down and weep with them if necessary, and get them to shed tears with you if possible. Soften their hearts. Get them to feel tenderly toward you. Use no lash and no violence, but approach them with reason, with persuasion, and love unfeigned. Guess which scripture he'd been reading? As we work with our children, as you try to decide, you have to take the phone away. You have to have boundaries. You have to have limits. You have to protect your children from evil. At the same time, as Stephanie said, this isn't your rule book. It's God's rule book. And we get to have his help. Along the way, if we personally try to increase our spirituality, there can be moments where we can change a life, where we can be an influence in a crucial moment. To share a personal experience, I was raised by a big tough dad. He was raised by a big tough dad too. My father had 8 children. He was a busy man. He was raised by quite a harsh father, and my dad had a bad temper. As I grew up, I learned to just stay clear of him if I could. And I didn't feel particularly close to him. He was a good man, took us to church. The man that he became, that some of you know, a great man who was an influence in the lives of many, happened a little later in his life when he was called to be a bishop in his 50s, and his heart was changed and he really was born again. I was raised in the pre-born again part, where it could get a little tough around the house. I didn't like the way he talked to my mom, and I pretty much, if he wanted me to do one thing, I thought maybe I'd like to do the other. I was not a very rebellious child. I liked the gospel, and so I wasn't like a bad kid. But you couldn't tell me anything. And I think that may be still true. My husband claims. I went to BYU and immediately fell in love with some 25-year-old charismatic graduate student who wanted to marry me immediately. And that being 40 years ago, both his bishop and my bishop thought it was a great idea. They wanted to get those grad students married off. And my father dug his heels in and said, "You're too young, and I won't give you a reception unless you're engaged at least 6 months." You know, he started using some of the control things, and that worked. You know, we had to not get married as quick as this fellow wanted to. I felt real uneasy in this engagement. I got engaged fairly quickly, and I was a little uneasy about it. I was very young. I didn't know how to feel the Spirit. I didn't know how to get an answer. I kept reading my scriptures. I sure wasn't going to talk to my dad about it because I knew my dad didn't want me to do it, and so that kind of kept me doing it. And 6 months went by. The wedding got closer. 3 wedding showers were given. The apartment got rented with my married name on the boxes. My stuff was moved over there. The announcements were printed, the pictures were taken, and all the while in my heart I kept thinking, oh my heavens, what am I doing? But as sure as my dad didn't want me to do it, I was going to do it. 6 weeks away from the wedding, my oldest brother Michael got married, Stephanie's dad. And I came home for that wedding. Michael was 27, the beautiful girl he married was 25. They were marvelous people, they were adults. They just loved each other in a way that in the manipulative, difficult relationship I was in, I could see was not in my relationship. I could see that I wasn't even an adult yet. It was very clear to me all that day that marriage was something far more serious than I had taken it to be, and that I was not ready to be doing this. But I couldn't back out. That would be to say that my dad had been right, and that everybody else had been right, and I had been wrong. The wedding pictures that Stephanie maybe could show you of Michael and his wife show me at the end of the row standing there with my face looking like a tomato because I'd been in the bathroom sobbing all day, just feeling so lost. I went home that night and I didn't sleep very much. I got up the next morning and thought I would take a drive and just try to think. I went out to the car, and my dad at 5 or 5:30 in the morning, who I'm sure had been lying awake, came and knocked on the window of the passenger side and asked if he could go with me. And I thought, oh no, I guess we'll have to talk. Well, he got in the car, and for once, he didn't lecture me. In fact, he was just very quiet. He didn't say anything at all. And I began to talk, and I began to cry, and I began to just talk, and he listened and listened. And at the end of all of my weeping and talking, he said, Marilyn, I'm sure you've read this, but I wonder if I could remind you of a scripture in the Doctrine and Covenants about when you're praying for an answer and you have something called a stupor of thought. And he reviewed with me the 8th and 9th section of the Doctrine and Covenants, where it talks about how we pray, and if we feel a feeling of confusion, that's a no. I'm sure I must have read that before, but as the scriptures do, when it's time for it to be an answer, it broke like a cloud, like the voice of thunder. He said, it seems to me when I'm looking at you that confusion is just what you feel. And so I think that's your answer. And I wept and wept and wept, and all of the barriers were down between my father and me. And he was able to influence me at a moment that was a life-changing moment. And then he stepped in with just a little bit of that wonderful old parental control that we love. He said, and if you need me to be the heavy, I'll call and tell him. You could tell he wanted to. And I said, no, it has to be me, it has to be me. And so I called my fiance, who was up in Northern California and had been preparing to come down in a few weeks. And I called and said, I'm going to break this engagement. And he said, I'm coming right now. I'm going to get in the car and I'm going to come right now. And the other extension picked up upstairs when we had extensions in the old days. Too bad cell phones don't have extensions, huh? We used to be able to listen in. The other extension picked up and my father's voice said, Dan, you'd be welcome to come to our home in a month. But for a month, my daughter gets to just have some time to think and to heal and to see how she really feels. And you'll be welcome at our door a month from now. My dad knew within 24 hours I would have felt so much relief that it would be over, but he gave me a month. And I didn't have to worry. I didn't have to get a phone call every night. He just stepped between me and that situation. He was perfect. He was perfect. Many years later, I met the 18-year-old girl that my fiance eventually married. A couple of years later, he married an 18-year-old girl who had had a very, very difficult life because he was living a double life. And after about 3 or 4 or 5 children, I think, he admitted that he was a closet homosexual, and he left with his lover to join the Chicago Opera Company and left her alone to raise those children. When I met her, I had a lot of survivor guilt. I thought, why was I saved from that terrible situation? And here I am married to the wonderful Craig Faulkner, and I have this wonderful life. And her life is so hard. Well, I don't know why things happen the way they happen, but I'll tell you one thing. I had a great dad who knew when to be an influence and had the Spirit of the Lord, and like an angel, just stepped down and told me what needed to be told at the moment it needed to be told, and he had the Spirit, and he did it perfectly. So all the other things he might have done that weren't perfect were forgiven from then on, and I began to appreciate how great he could be. So that's my final point. We're not perfect parents. We screw up. We get mad. We do things that are wrong. We just damage our children one way or another. I used to always kid my kids and say, you know, when they were all upset at me when I was laying down the law, and I'd say, fine, put it on a list and tell your therapist later. I had no idea that this would actually happen. I had no idea that down the road I would actually be paying bills to people to whom they were reading the list of the stuff I did to damage them. So, you know, it's very humbling. But this whole process of being born again, this whole process of trying to be born of the Spirit, we're going through it personally while we're also trying to raise children and teach them the gospel. I mean, it's kind of a mess, but it's a beautiful mess. It's Heavenly Father working with us and through us, and He really does trust us to be an influence in the lives of our children. So it's my prayer. Was that one? Oh, the Bruce Hafen quote, I've got that right here. When he talks about being born again, he says, these words do not describe an event, but a process. He does not request the answer of a yes or no question, have you been born again, but an essay written in the winding trail of our experience. As we move along the trail, we will find that he is not only aware of our limitations, but that he will in due course compensate for them after all we can do. So that's my final thought to you. As parents, we have the Savior to compensate, to heal where we make a mistake. We'll have those moments where we truly are an influence and an inspiration. We'll have those moments where we are truly a problem for our Heavenly Father in terms of raising the children, and that we do damage. And He will be there to compensate. And that's why it's so wonderful that we get to raise our children with our hands in the hands of God. This is what I bought myself for Christmas, to remind myself that within the lives of each one of my children, I'm not the only one that's influencing them. But there are legions of angels who are entrusted with their care right along with me, that we may enlist His help and feel His inspiration as we parent our children and grandchildren, and that He may bless every one of them. I pray in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Next week, we're going to talk about the first few chapters of Alma, and we're going to see if it's time to be born again. Oh, dear.